Hey, what's up, guys? So last Philosophy Friday video, I did the Hegelian Dialectic in 60 seconds, which was a bit of a task, but I basically read the content of that video from an article that I was writing, and that's the article that I'm going to focus on now. So I'm going to go into a little more depth about the Hegelian Dialectic, but from a psychological perspective. So the article, which if you want to read it yourself, is going to be posted in the description below on my blog. It's called The Psychology of the Hegelian Dialectic. So I'm going to be dilating between the Hegelian dialectic on the general theoretical level and, kind of constricting back into the individual psychological level and showing sort of a connection between those two levels. It's not an in-depth technical analysis of the Hegelian dialectic. I'm just I'm just connecting dots here between the individual and the group, or the society, so to speak. So anyway, I'm going to read it and add a bit of commentary here and there just to clarify some points when I feel it's needed. Hope you enjoy it. So, to put it very simply, the Hegelian dialectic is G.W.F. Hegel's theory that progress of cultural views toward truth is anything but linear. Instead, the conventional thesis causes rebellion, and therefore a birth of an antithesis. Belief patterns oscillate between groups, between those two extremes, both of which have certain particulars correct, but are out of touch with general truth. People are split into those two camps at once until the antithesis eventually becomes the new thesis. That causes a new antithesis to arise, and the cycle repeats, with each new thesis being slightly closer to the overarching truth, but which still may have overcompensated regarding the specifics. Imagine a pendulum swinging where belief is split between one peak of the swing and the other. Truth itself is the force of gravity weighing that pendulum down. And as the pendulum slows down, because you can't escape truth, right? Ideally, people should come together in submission of the truth at the pendulum's resting point in the middle. This process, according to Hegel, takes at least 3 moves. So you have one extreme on one end of the pendulum swing, and then the other extreme, and then they settle in the middle because you can't escape what is the case, right? And as mortal beings, we're generally, on some crucial level, disconnected from that. So there's a political application of Hegel's theory, a cultural misrepresentation, in my view, that suggests that the Hegelian dialectic process begins with a pragmatic agenda, usually control, power, and money. And instead of each step's getting closer to the truth, it rather gets closer to fulfilling that goal. The problem here is metaphysical. Pragmatism alone is end-oriented. It's not truth-oriented, it's goal-oriented. So it cannot provide a ground to account for the context of the theory, nor for the act of theorizing itself. When you're goal-oriented, everything depends. Everything is conditional. The steps you take toward that goal are conditional on that goal being fulfilled, So if you're a consequentialist morally, you're going to like the idea of a pragmatic morality or pragmatic metaphysic. But the problem is that there's no grounding in metaphysics there's no metaphysical grounding for reality, for existence, for morality, for truth itself within a pragmatic structure if we take it in isolation of another metaphysical structure that does accept truth itself. Anyway, moving on. So pragmatism cannot provide a ground to account for the contents of the theory, nor for the act of theorizing itself, which is a product of human consciousness, and product of the fact, really, that we are spiritual, truth-oriented beings. So what grounds, though, the question remains, what grounds the goal toward which this dialectic aims, if we're to take this misinterpretation seriously? Is it nature? Is it a common value among participants? Is it their conscious agreement, their consensus? Well, each of these is logically unsound. For truth is neither determined by mere survival, that would be the naturalistic fallacy, nor by consensus, that would be argumentum ad populum, both logical fallacies. It still requires we, fallen mortal beings, to have faith in something as a grounding for that goal, just as we must appeal to something higher than ourselves in discerning truth. We will leave that here for now, however. This is not really a piece on the metaphysics of the theory, but I think I have fleshed out everything I really need to on that topic. So psychologically, we can certainly observe the Hegelian dialectic in microcosmic form when we observe the evolution of an individual's beliefs through time. It is not our first impulse when we are confronted with new information that challenges how we think to simply observe that information and our responses to it, to watch the pendulum swing, as well as to be self-aware of how we respond to that is. No, it's our first impulse to map that information onto our preconditioned patterns of thinking. Whether that means to accept and adopt the conventional thesis or to rebel against it. You're either part of the team or you want to start your own team. Regardless, you're going to rebel against that which does not initially align to whatever it is you hold sacred, Let's see, where am I? The former, that is to accept the thesis, is the result of one's being temperamentally more agreeable, and the latter less agreeable from a big five trait perspective. Agreeableness deals with basically, on one extreme end, if you're 99th percentile in agreeableness, you're going to be a huge pushover. You're not ever going to think for yourself, or at least act on your own thoughts. You're going to go with the flow. You're going to, put all of your trust in society, in the government, into your family, friends, people around you, and accept their influence openly and basically be a doormat, On the other extreme end, if you're first percentile, extremely disagreeable, you're going to end up in prison because you have absolutely no regard for the law, for convention, but in a way that's really no more based in critical thinking than the opposite. Look at Ted Kaczynski, you know what I mean? Like, he was extremely disagreeable. He had certain things correct about the state of the world, about the facts, but he deeply struggled with what to do about that, Anyway, we're going to get to more of that later. So regardless of our temperament, the same holds true. We tend to ride the pendulum to the other end and back again, repeatedly, as to learn most of life's lessons by trial and error. Because when you overcompensate, the errors are going to speak for themselves, right? I don't intend to commit the composition fallacy here, that is to say that what is true of the individual parts should be true of the whole, but rather to draw an analogy between the individual psychology on the specific level and the Hegelian dialectic on the general level, as per Hegel. An example of this on the psychological level would be the case of someone's growing up with an inadequate Christian education or family or religious life, and they overcompensate for that in young adulthood by becoming an atheist, perhaps because they read The God Delusion by Dildo Dawkins when they were 14 or something, and that had an influence on them. It kind of confirmed for them that their upbringing, there was something wrong with it, But with growth and wisdom, and after many debates with friends and family members, and seeing what sort of turmoil the disagreement itself produces, not necessarily the contents of the disagreement, they eventually evolve into adopting a more stoic mindset, grateful attitude, and they find their way back to a more focused, spiritual, and even Christian perspective on reality and life.
Where am I at time-wise? Shit.
10 minutes. So I want to place emphasis now on the grateful attitude that is required to see the truth and to do something about it. It is one thing to be able to interpret facts and even to see higher patterns of truth correctly. But in doing so, there is no guarantee that one will know what to do with that information. The Unabomber, for example. An authentic Stoic mindset involves gratitude when it's at its best. There is power in indifference, yes. It allows one to remove emotion from the initial analysis and to see things clearly. But without gratitude, this will cause apathy. For one can see and understand truth on a mechanistic level, yet still feel some desire to correct what is, to what one thinks should be the case. This is an interference of the ego. To be grateful is to understand and to consciously, in every necessary moment, which, by the way, needs to be judged on the basis of deep values, to control that ego response rather than to act on it in an attempt to control the world, which is to say, control what you cannot control. The ego thinks it's bigger than it is. Gratitude, not indifference itself, allows for true acceptance of that which is out of the individual's control. From there, one is not bogged down in the negative attitude of the ego, or the negative attitude that the ego would create in reaction to the truth, but rather a world of higher learning will open up to one. Community roles and individual relationships are crucial both for development and as a test for one's true attitude. It also is a product of ego for one to consciously decide, however, I am grateful, right? It's another thing to test it against social pressure. An example would be in letting go of a romantic relationship and being grateful that one's former partner will be moving on to other things and people that are better suited to them than one is. One can experience a feeling of unhealthy possessiveness over other people as well as over their environment. In fact, people who are guided in this way by their ego, for them, people themselves are simply part of that environment that the untamed ego seeks to control. They are mere objects, means to one's end. Now, regardless of whatever end you choose, again, this goes back to why consequentialism is wrong and pragmatism is wrong. Regardless of that goal, that end, one should not treat others merely as means, but rather as ends in themselves. True love is expressed, perhaps more often than not, after that relationship is over with. It comes with that acceptance that the former lover has freely moved on. You know, if you love something, set it free. And in being grateful for that. That's love, I think, maybe. Let me know. Romantic relationships are the ultimate test of gratitude because they are so muddied by emotion. It is the context in which the line between intuition and emotion, two very different things, is the least clear. Intuition knows that to be grateful is to be free, and that is to be loved. That is true compassion. Emotion, empathy included, however, is the chemical response that the ego impulsively triggers when it does not accept what is, or not accept the truth. So to dilate back out to the general, the Hegelian dialectic is the cultural context for ego expression. It is the natural result of group-based thinking, which is, in fact, submission to cultural fashion at the expense of based critical thinking. It can be consciously and systematically directed by a government entities appealing to the pity and emotion of the public, of course, and persuading them that those impulsive, involuntary responses are virtuous. So a governmental entity is going to be playing God, in a sense. Therefore, it takes one absolutely no work to join the team of the good. One must only remain a slave to one's emotions and be able to call out anyone who does not share that sentiment, no matter how well-reasoned that opposing position may be. Because, when emotions are involved, reason just goes out the window, basically. The reward for this in today's technocratic culture is not personal or spiritual fulfillment, but rather material convenience, which one would, in reality, be better off finding a way to provide oneself. The more self-sustaining you can be without selling your soul, the better you can be. The better you will be. Whether Hegel's claim, though, that there is unity and truth at the end of the road, however, regarding the core things that are near and dear to us as individuals and spiritual beings, for example, what should be normalized regarding family, love, sex, beauty, etc., aesthetic judgment, moral judgment, this remains to be seen. So I think Hegel's theory is open-ended and not conclusive, and that's the problem with it. And especially on the individual level, we all have different degrees to which we are susceptible and vulnerable to cultural influence. That's a psychological fact, Some people have to learn life's lessons the hard way more than others. Some people are a little more tuned in with their intuition. They may tend to be less empathetic, The more empathetic you are, the more difficult it is to separate true intuition, which is your really connection to the higher realm, from your ego and biological responses to things. So anyway, that's my video today on my article called Psychology of the Hegelian Dialectic. Hope you enjoyed it, and you can read it via the link below if you like. See you in the next video, guys. Cheers.